Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here. I spent about 11 years here in ministry at Loyola University in Chicago, at Hales Franciscan on South Cottage Grove when it was all male, and then at St. Ignatius College Prep, where when I was there, I lived with the Sisters of Providence of St. Mary's of the Woods at St. Felicitas Parish. So I'm so happy to engage you on this topic of race and gender in the context of interculturality. I attended my community's all-female high school in Toledo, Ohio, Notre Dame Academy, from 1976 to 1980. I was an aspirant, one of about 15 to 18 high school girls who were interested and open to religious life. We lived in the residence wing of Notre Dame Academy with our two fearless sisters who were our directresses. We ate lunch in the dining hall with the 400 other day students. And we lived in community. An experience of the past, but that's one reason I sometimes think of myself as somewhat of a rare bird. I will always remember a conversation that I had with one of my classmates who was African American. Her name was Jean. Jean told me that her mother had attended Notre Dame Academy in the 1950s and had been interested in being a high school aspirant and inquired about signing up. This query eventually was brought to the provincial superior at the time. This woman eventually determined that the community was not ready to accept Negro girls in the aspirant school. Some 20 or so years later, this same provincial superior would one day, at the very, very end of her 12-year term in office, sign off on my joining the aspirant school. The community was not ready to accept African American girls. I have often reflected on this story. Over the past few years, it has come to mind more often. In the face of, the killing of unarmed African Americans, men, women, and children, the offensive discourse of the present occupant of the Oval Office, and the increase in hate crimes. I continue to ponder, the community is not ready. Sometimes, in my loneliness and frustration with facing these realities, I would think, what has my community done to be ready? What has my community done to nurture a spirit that Black and African American, Latina, and Asian persons would find welcoming? The members of my province and I have experienced study circles on racism in the 1990s. We've had different presentations on issues of diversity, race, and racism. After the National Black Sisters Conference first national gathering of Black Catholic women in 2001, some women that my province helped to sponsor to attend that conference shared their experience with the sisters in my province. Nevertheless, my community has never begun a systematic engagement with racism, diversity, and exclusion. I have always hoped that we would do something intentional and developmental. I'm thinking here of the Crossroads ministry that you have here. So I ponder that question. And then I also ponder my question when I think about gender, this question. What has my community done to nurture a spirit that non-binary persons would find welcoming? How can religious congregations and all of us ready ourselves to support gender justice and engage non-binary individuals who may be interested in religious life or in being our collaborators and friends? How can we, women and men religious, and all of us, open ourselves to people who are different than ourselves so that we can be attentive and immersed citizens of the world who read the signs of the time and promote the reign of God? So having this opportunity to delve into the concept of interculturality has been enlightening and energizing for me. As many of you already know, because you're familiar with Anthony Gittin's work, Living Mission Interculturally, he says, quote, "An intercultural community shares intentional commitment to the common life, motivated not by pragmatic considerations alone, but by shared religious conviction and common purposes." This is my congregation's present general chapter mission statement. Trusting in God, who makes all things new, we commit ourselves to live incarnational spirituality, grow in life-giving relationships, be one in diversity. It is imperative, I believe, that we all strive to live outside our comfort zones, as Gittins reminds us. And that's something that I've spent a lot of my religious life doing. I grew up in New Rochelle, New York. My dear mother, Josephine Veronica Dillon, was a graduate of St. Vincent, of the historic St. Vincent Hospital Medical Center. We belonged to an Irish Catholic parish in suburban New York, and my mother once told me that when she went to register to belong to the parish, this is New Rochelle, New York, a near north suburb, and the priest told her that she was the first Black Catholic that he had ever met. My mother was absolutely stunned by that. As I mentioned to you, I joined my religious congregation, or I became affiliated with them in high school. And so I had a lot of different experiences, but it was overwhelmingly a positive experience. But living outside one's comfort zone is something that we all have to deal with in one way or another. So while there is a special concern for how interculturality can play out in international congregations, there are so many implications for how embodying intercultural ways of being in the world can be good for women and men religious and all those we will encounter in our lives, for all of us. Some people we will walk shoulder to shoulder with. Others we may meet en route to somewhere else. Interculturality can bring life to all of these encounters. As you know, interculturality is an invitation to grow and to change, a new way of being in the world and being in relationship, a new way to open ourselves to the cultures of others, how they understand themselves racially, ethnically, and regarding gender. This is an invitation for us to keep up with the changing times, so that we can indeed read the signs of the time and respond accordingly. Now, I've never spoken before about non-binary individuals. This is new, but I did a Google search. But there are other ways that I hope to later engage myself reading books, joining book clubs, watching movies. This is all good, develops different parts of our brain. All this will move us out of our comfort zone. You know, there's such a fluidity in our culture about terminology. I got an email from someone with reference to pronouns, and I really didn't know what that was about. So I set out trying to understand the lived experience of some of our sisters and brothers. Let me share some of the things I learned. From a wonderful site, transequality.org, where non-binary is defined. Most people, including most transgender people, are either male or female. But some people don't neatly fit into the categories of man or woman, or male or female. For example, some people have a gender that blends elements of being a man or a woman, or a gender that is different than either male or female. Some people don't identify with any gender. Some people's gender changes over time. People whose gender is not male or female use many different terms to describe themselves, with non-binary being one of the most common. Other terms include genderqueer, agender, bigender, and more. None of these terms mean exactly the same thing, but all speak to an experience of gender that is not simply male or female. And so we have to be humble as we engage these conversations and be open to learning more, being corrected. I had some interesting experience when I was teaching at Loyola. I had some students who would come to class doing all kinds of gender bending with what they were wearing. And you know, it really helped me to stretch my mind. And then I had an encounter with a colleague of mine, someone who, like myself, was funded by the Fund for Theological Education when I did my PhD work at Notre Dame. And one time we were talking about something that had to do with gender identity, and she just, questioned, well, who gets to determine what it means to be male or to be female? And I have sat with that for some time now. And so as we try to engage these topics in brand new ways, let's do everything that we can possibly do to learn about these important topics. Issues of race have always been important to me. When I did my master's work at Xavier University of Louisiana, I remember the day that Brian Massengale, Father Brian Massengale, yeah, everybody shaking, yes, shaking your head, where he taught us about what it meant to be a womanist. It's like, oh my goodness, I've never heard this before. It was so amazing and it was so life-giving. And I gradually began to realize that that woman was me. That woman was me. Let me share a little bit about what it means to be a womanist, because I describe myself as a Catholic theologian who writes in womanist perspective. A womanist, from womanish, opposite of girlish, that is frivolous, irresponsible, not serious. A black female or feminist of color, from the black folk expression of mothers to female children, you acting womanish, that is, like a woman, usually referring to outrageous, audacious, courageous, or willful behavior, wanting to know more and in greater depth than is considered good for one. Interested in grown-up doings, acting grown-up, being grown-up, interchangeable with another black folk expression, you trying to be grown. Responsible, in charge, serious. And this, of course, comes from Alice Walker's award-winning book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. Apparently, Alice Walker was referring to what it meant to be a womanist, and her editors were like, you really have to provide something. And so she provides in the beginning pages a dictionary-type definition. And so I love this because it helped me to grow into my identity. It goes on, if you'll allow me. Also, a woman who loves other women, sexually and or non-sexually, appreciates and prefers women's culture, women's emotional flexibility, values tears as natural counterbalance of laughter, and women's strength, sometimes loves individual men sexually and or non-sexually, committed to survival and wholeness of entire people, male and female, not a separatist, except periodically for health. I must admit, when I first heard that part of the definition, wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with that. I really wasn't sure. And then the third entry, loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit, loves love and food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folk, loves herself, regardless. Womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. And so one of the things I love about this definition, and sort of what's prompted me to reflect upon what I call womanist sheltering, is that this is a concept that is about embracing and affirming the entire African American community. And if ever there's been a time in my lifetime, I think now is the time where there needs to be all kinds of sheltering of African American people in the United States. I was struck by this when I was asked to review James Cone's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, a book I never wanted to read. I never wanted to read it. It was so raw. But in it, there was a section that spoke about a woman, a mother, a wife, and her husband and children, and they lived in a town, and word got out that they had intentions of lynching this father, this husband. And so over the cover of darkness, this man was able to get out of town, and there the mother remained, sheltering, in place, I like to think. How was she going to care for her children? How was she going to help them deal with the absence of their father and the tensions and the struggle of living in such a hostile environment? Womanist sheltering. And so as I speak about race, I have skin in the game, you might say. And I also have stories, but I also have a community that I feel a lot of affection for. But I do know that sometimes there can be difficult conversations. And a few years ago, my community and a lot of other women religious took the cultural audit, okay? And my community did, and we had a chance to look at what some of us called, our shadow sides. And we have different shadow sides. And I just had a nice conversation, tear-filled, with your vicar for religious. Because when I was here in Chicago at Loyola, I asked to go on exclaustration. And it was a really very difficult situation. But Sister was so kind to me. I called her because I was writing a letter to the Holy Father, Pope Francis. And I wanted to be able to put down that I CC'd her And I was writing a letter because had completed my 4th year in exclaustration, and I was relocating from Loyola. And so I had asked for another year, but I was not given permission to have that year. And I just was perplexed. I didn't know what to do, quite frankly. And so I had some conversations with some people I knew, people who knew. One of my friends knew a woman who was a canon lawyer and a civil lawyer. And so she encouraged me to write down my thoughts and feelings. And I just decided, Pope Francis had not been in office that long, and I thought, I'm writing to him. So I wrote to him, and I told him my story. And that really helped me, because through his kindness, and I don't know what he did, but I suspect he just gave my letter to the Sacred Congregation, which was fine. It was coming from him, and of course that would make all the difference. But through his kindness, I was able to have another year of exclaustration, okay? And I was able to finish my discernment, and I as you can see here, I returned to my religious congregation. And so I was very moved to tears when I was told that was you, sister, because I had never met you before. And so what can I say? Like all of our relationships, sometimes they can be filled with difficulty and pain and challenging, but I will tell you what the blessing has been for me, and that is that I've learned something, and I think we can apply it to interculturality, and it's that in difficult times, we have to stay at the table and continue the conversation. Stay at the table and continue the conversation. When I returned to my community some 10 months later, I wasn't absolutely sure I was going to stay, but I needed to go back and I needed to continue my discernment. And I did that. And I've got just a lot of love for the sisters of my province who were so kind to me, to my provincial who continued the conversation with me. And I was never a marginal sister. Even though I lived singly for a while, I was very close to my community. Actually, in 2004, I was the first delegate elected to our International Congress from my province of Toledo, Ohio. I just say that to let you know I wasn't an isolate. I was really immersed into my community. And so I think interculturality is about willing to be uncomfortable, continuing the conversation. And that's what I hope more and more that can happen in my religious congregation, that we can have the difficult conversations. So when the Black Lives Matter movement is being spoken about, or there is a murder of someone, I remember one summer there were many murders, I didn't exactly know who I could talk to, okay? But I hope that maybe, and I suspect maybe now as some of my sisters will listen to this, maybe they are there to continue the conversation, and I didn't maybe trust them enough. And so some of these disappointments that I've experienced and challenges, they've stretched me so that I have been able to grow in new ways. One thing that helped me to grow considerably was my experience at Xavier University's Institute for Black Catholic Studies, where I spent 6 steamy summers in New Orleans, okay, from 1991 through 1997. And I got my degree in theology from there. I learned so much. I got to be more comfortable in my own skin. Remember, I grew up in an Irish Catholic parish where everybody was Irish on St. Patrick's Day, okay? And so that experience, it helped me so much. I grappled with Jesus is Black. I learned about what it meant to be a womanist. I'll never forget one summer, there was a movie out, can't think of the title of it, but in our Black Approaches to Psychology, we watched this movie together and we had a chance to process things. And the exciting part was that it wasn't just African Americans, it was other individuals who were working in the Black community, who were there getting certificate degrees. You know, Vanessa's involved in that program, and other individuals that you may know, and it was life-changing. So one thing I would say is that, you know, when individuals from underrepresented populations come to religious life, you know, explore with them what opportunities they might be drawn to grow into a greater sense of who they are. The Institute is not necessarily for everyone, but there may be other possibilities, and this was so life-changing and very, very formative. So that's extremely important, I believe. And another thing that's interesting is that, you know, I think nowadays we are trying to attend to younger women who are joining our community and trying to understand their culture also. Okay, I'm a member of a group among the United States Sisters of Notre Dame of Coesfeld, who are going to be 40 or under in 2025. Okay, we're the new young sisters, okay? There are about 42 of us. Our US provinces in Chardon, in Covington, in Toledo, and in Thousand Oaks, California are coming together next year, and we're presently in the process of discerning leadership. And so I've had many wonderful opportunities to meet with these women and get to know them, which was exactly the plan, that we would get to know each other. Okay, I'm going to catch up with my slides. Okay, so an intercultural community is motivated by a shared religious commitment and a common purpose. Okay, and this moves us to interculturality, and you will certainly remember that image from Father Gitten's book, where he speaks about the nature of intercultural living, whereby individuals come together, are open to being pushed beyond their comfort zone, and they enter into a new relationship with each other. Okay, they're being transformed into a new way of being themselves and a new way of being in relationship. And I really think that is so exciting for us. And I think anywhere, whether it's in religious life, in the community that you share here at CTU, or wherever you are, wherever that kind of spirit can be engendered, I think it is a wonderful thing to do for the world. It's a wonderful contribution to be willing to attend to another, okay? To be willing to do things in a different way, to listen. I've had some international experiences in my congregation. Attending that general chapter was one, but mostly they've been experiences where individuals from other countries have come to the United States to visit us. My province has sponsored our sisters in Papua New Guinea since the 1960s, and more recently, 2 of our other US provinces are ministering in Uganda. And a group of Ugandan sisters came and visited the United States provinces, and I must admit, I was filled with so much delight and joy. Do you know why? Well, it was because these women are so lovely. They're so ready. Actually, the sisters from around the world who are presently ministering in Uganda are leaving next October because these women are ready. They're ready to take over in every area of their community, and I couldn't be more tickled. And I look forward to the day when some of them will be on our General Council, and where they can bring the gifts, such gifts, to our congregation, because we've never had anyone of African ancestry or anyone from Papua New Guinea. We've never had a brown-skinned, like me, individual on our General Council, and I do look forward to that day. what's wonderful about intercultural living, there's that willingness for all to grow and change and to find their new sense of self and their voice. All members must have opportunities to grow into their ever-evolving identities. For me, as I said, that was about attending the Institute for Black Catholic Studies and learning about being a womanist and learning about racial identity attitudes, which I'll say more about in a moment. As trust grows in community, people are ready to have the difficult conversations. And here I return to what I think is so, so important. Remaining at the table and engaging in the conversation is part of the commitment that goes beyond living in religious life. You know, wherever there are misunderstandings, let's see what we can do to create relationships where people can go back to individuals and say, you know, I said thus and so, or I did this, and I sensed you didn't understand why I did this or said this, or that it bothered you. Okay, I think this is such an invitation for the world community, I truly believe, to be about reaching out and transforming the world by allowing ourselves to be transformed by others. Okay. I had a wonderful opportunity to read a wonderful essay in another book on interculturality that I believe some of you may have read. It's called More or Less in the Divine Image, Gender Justice in an Intercultural Context, by a Sinsinawa Dominican, Sister Toni Harris. And she opens her essay by telling the story of a sister that she was living with in Rome who was teaching at one of the Pontifical Institutes. And she was teaching a very multicultural class. And somewhere into the class, she learned that there were some women religious from Africa who were writing papers for some of the priests and seminarian students from Africa in the same class. It doesn't say what she did about it, okay? But this author wonders, what questions does this experience raise? What does the situation reveal about culture? What assumptions does it demonstrate about gender roles? Or is this simply an example of a few misguided individuals engaged in questionable behavior that has little to do with culture or gender? What do you think? Would you turn to the person next to you and just share some initial thoughts? So let me go over that again. And I don't mean this to target any one group. I just happened to have found this article that I really loved and I found to be extremely accessible. And so let me just go over the contours of this again. So this woman religious is teaching in a Pontifical Institute in a multicultural class, and she finds out that some African sisters are writing papers for some African priests and seminarians who are also in the class. Does that say anything to you? Or what comes to mind? Would you turn to the person next to you maybe and just chat briefly? How we doing? Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much. Let me see, how much longer should I speak?
You want a can? Need more water?
No, I think I'll be fine. Thank you so much. Okay. You know, I have a feeling, okay, I hope I didn't walk into a landmine. I have a feeling we may be sitting at the table. So does anyone have any thoughts they wish to share that might really, help me, help us? Maybe offer some reflections? Yes.
We talked about like the usual things about, we talked about the usual things like, it's a gender thing and, they probably do everything for the priests and seminarians. I said, well, we don't know that. Maybe the sisters wanted the priests and the seminarians to do well. They actually took charge and said, I'm going to do the work for you.
We don't know. Okay, there's a young lady back here who has her hand raised. Thank you, sister.
And I'm a religious.
Thank you.
I think it's very, what was telling for me was the immediate murmuring in the room when you read it.
Okay,
That was a very quick reaction.
yes,
And I think with culture, this is where we go wrong.
okay,
By putting our lens and perspective on a situation where we don't clearly understand it.
yes,
And the book is not conclusive, as you mentioned, I think.
right,
There's a fourth element that I want to introduce. I did some of my education in Kenya.
thank you.
Was it an economic arrangement? When you go to study abroad and you come from indigenous congregations, priests always have a way of making money because they will say masses and get stipends that sisters do not have access to. So having gone to a university in Kenya, I know there were always 3 or 4 bright students in business, writing papers for students who had money but didn't want to work hard. But that's just another fourth dimension I'm introducing. I think it's very hard to cast any conclusive judgment on this situation. And I think that's where the narratives go wrong, is when such a story now becomes repeated often,
Yes,
and we are judging our whole collective. My other problem is they say Africa. They do not specify a country. We are the biggest and most diverse continent.
thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. And I won't ever use this account again because of the manner in which it can be misinterpreted. So thank you. Wow, that was amazing. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Okay. In this article, Sister Toni Harris also, turns to Catholic social teaching as a way of informing our discourse on gender issues and gender equality. And she describes the writings of a Professor Mary Martone, who's writing about Gaudium et Spes. Gaudium et Spes is a pastoral constitution that puts a great deal of emphasis on the dignity of the human person and the solidarity of the entire human family. It encourages us to support this dignity and solidarity in the context of the modern world, to scrutinize the signs of the times and to interpret these signs in the light of the gospel. It recognizes the shift from a static concept of reality to a more dynamic and evolutionary one, and highlights various concerns that have arisen as a result of this shift. She also, the author cites quotes John the 23rd. It's a great quote. Since women are becoming even more conscious of their human dignity, they will not tolerate being treated as inanimate objects or mere instruments, but claim, both in domestic and public life, the rights and duties that befit a human person. What a quote. What a conversation starter, hopefully. So all these are ways maybe to see the kind of vision that some of our, past leaders, our past Holy Father in this case had. It's so direct, women aren't having it anymore, okay? There are expectations. So what I'd like to close with is talking about a couple of things. I wrote a paper a couple of years ago on negative contrast experience and Ignatian appraisal. And in it, I looked at unconscious bias as a reason that stops some people from responding to injustice when they see it. Okay? Now sometimes, I don't know if I'm correct or not, but sometimes, if there's a situation with an African American person who gets shot, I think there are some people out there who are like, well, wait a minute, what happened? What really caused this to happen? And so they reserve their judgment until they have some more answers, and maybe they'll never get enough answers, and maybe they'll never believe it because it's, gasp, fake news, right? And so that's an invitation. And so what I attempted to do was look at how the consciousness examen may be a way for individuals and communities to begin looking at biases that we have and that we want to be rid of. I actually got the idea from Jesuit Father Dean Brackley, okay, who I hear was an absolutely amazing individual. It's from his book, The Call to Discernment. It was just a small section, but it really got my attention when I read it. From my article, Brackley views the consciousness examen with a focus on bias as the path to clear perception. Such clear perception demands cognitive hygiene, and he explains that cognitive hygiene does not simply involve pure reason and conscious awareness. It also requires untangling the habits of our hearts and ordering our commitments. And since our deepest assumptions and commitments are rooted in our identity, cognitive liberation depends on personal transformation or conversion. So powerful. We imbibe all kinds of biases when we're really small. And this, I thought, was one path to trying to, to unroot them. And I also came upon, as I was writing this article, an article from Review for Religious on communal examen, where a Jesuit who was director in a formation house had gave the young men he was with an opportunity for a communal consciousness examen. And this allowed them to together reflect upon what was going on in their local communities and whether there were biases that were being manifest as they engaged people who were different than they were. So this is a Father Shano, S.J., has written about communal examen of consciousness and suggests that it can help the community as a group to attend to its daily life in a prayerful way. He discusses the method used and his experience with weekly communal examen in the context of a Jesuit novitiate. His two-part approach consists of what he calls guided examen and conversational examen. Part one is a loving and contemplative look at our life together. Part 2 invites dialogue or conversation so that we share with the others our reflections on our community's life. Sometimes listening to another's reflections on lived community can shed light on patterns of behavior that were previously unnoticed, and the context of community among friends may increase the willingness of members to acknowledge their biases. And so I offer that, perhaps, as a way that communities or groups or friends might do a consciousness examen to try to tune in to different biases that they may not be aware of, and perhaps their friends might be aware of and might be able to assist them. So I think my time is coming to an end right now. So what I'd like you to do now, if you will, is perhaps maybe turn to a different person, if there's another person on the other side of you, or have a group of 3, and just talk about maybe the possibility of something of a communal examen that its goal is to get at biases, or even an individual consciousness examen with guiding questions that might help individuals deal with unconscious bias that we're manifesting and that's maybe making, the lives of others, maybe it's a burden for them, maybe they're having a difficulty. Okay, could you do that for me, please? So reflect upon unconscious bias as something that perhaps can be engaged during a communal type of consciousness examen. Unconscious bias.
invite you back to the whole. Clearly, there's a lot of conversation to be had. Because we're at 5 o'clock and we will conclude at least by 5:15. What I asked LaReine-Marie was if we could just open it up now. We have microphones on both sides to, perhaps you will want to talk about the unconscious bias, but perhaps something else has brought you forth as a question, a comment that you would like to just bring up. So we might do one or two and then invite LaReine-Marie to respond if that's the piece of it. So comments, questions, what's come forth for you?
I have a question, which is, obviously bias is unconscious for probably everyone in this room, but besides, just two people initially going at it, can you suggest ways for a person to become more conscious? What comes to me is possibly films, movies, things like that. What can expand one's awareness?
Well, I'm standing up here as an example of what you don't know that you don't know.
Yes.
Because when you started your presentation, you said, "Oh, you like have crossroads here." Well, our congregation has been like 18 years in the becoming anti-racist, multicultural process.
Yes.
So there was a bit of smugness that came from my neck up to my ear. Oh, yes, of course, I know that. And we are, of course, advanced in that. And then you mentioned Tony Harris, who is the prioress of our congregation. And you just don't know what you just don't know. And so we keep continuing to know. I'm very curious to get onto a new adventure of understanding what my conscious or unconscious biases are. So I'm that'll be an exciting new way of becoming allies. We're learning all these new words. Now, if we only knew what they meant.
Thank you.
You were terrific, by the way. So good.
Thank you very much. I don't recall the name of it, but The Ohio University has a center that deals with all kinds of issues of bias, and they have tutorials for people. You can take a test to see if you're biased, and they have just a lot of good articles. I just can't remember the name of this center, but it's at the Ohio State University. And so I think perhaps, those are ways. But I was really moved by that article that I alluded to because, among friends, you have a good friend, they can tell you a lot of things that other people can't tell you. And that's why I was so moved by that. But I also have an idea for a book, and it has to do with the consciousness exam and how perhaps some guiding questions can help people engage topics that they would never engage on their own. It could do with, it could relate to a lot of things. It could relate to the environment. It can relate to, biases we have against people because of economic background or from the global north or the global south. So those are some of my ideas. You're welcome.
Hi. I am a seminarian here at CTU, and I'm also a graduate Loyola, so Corandus, in a master's in social work. And so a lot of the work that I do at the local hospital is with individuals who experience various different extreme responses, i.e. suicidal ideation, especially among trans community and among LGBTQIA community. So as a future priest, as a member of a religious community, as a social worker, one of the struggles I have, and so I appreciate this, one of the struggles I have is how do we encounter, how do we engage in and with LGBTQIA community, because I think oftentimes from the church perspective, we often stand back and we often turn our back on these persons. And so I think as part of interculturality, I feel like we really need to walk with, journey with. And so I guess one is to commend you for your ability to stand up there and say, I support and I walk with persons of different experience. Because I think, first of all, that's the first step. And so I commend you for that, and I thank you for that. The second, so I guess the question ultimately is, what do we do next? After acknowledging, after engagement, what are the next steps? Have you experienced any next steps? I know you said you're still in the kind of the educating stage. Have you processed through and been able to recognize any next steps that one can do after they become educated?
I'm a newbie at this too, so I really cannot, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a search and see if I can't find a good book that I might be able to read so that I could better understand one individual's story. And I think that's where I'm going to start. And then if things come up in class, I'm going to welcome conversations and insights and comments. So.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I think in terms of racism, and this is my own personal analysis, of course. I think it's so subconscious that most of us are not even aware of the fact that we are engaging in racism. When we talk about white privilege, the person who's white is not even aware of that privilege. And for those of us who are people of color, we have what's called the internalized oppression, where we're not even aware of the fact that we are, in a sense, conspiring with those in white privilege. And one of the things I feel we should do is just call it for what it is. I mean, I was in that class, the other day, and I told people, we talk about racism, say it's the white man. Let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not, water it down. I was at the Hispanic, the program that we have every year for Hispanic in studying theology. And we had a theologian who came to talk to us and gave his story about how he came out of the body and everything. And it was a great story, which I understood. But I no longer see that person, and I won't name him, but because I'm sure some of you know him. But he wasn't standing up the way he should be for the Latinos, the way I thought we need to be standing up for. And then it occurred to me, well, he's going to be writing books. Who's going to be the donors? If he's whatever projects he's working on, who was going to be financing those projects? Okay, and it's the white man. And so that's when we kind of try to say, well, let's not be as outspoken. So anyway, I just think we have to be serious with ourselves, be honest with ourselves, and not be pretentious in any way.
Thank you so much.
Like Mary, I'm also from the same congregation, and we're part of our anti-racism team. And we're actually going to our spring meeting on Thursday. And one of the things that evolved for us in working with Crossroads and coming to understand, because we called ourselves a training team. And in our work and trying to work towards collective, we realized it's much different than training. We changed that first T to transformation. That it is also a religious faith work as well as intellectual. And as those of us who are dealing with our white superiority, it's like we got to keep going with our eyes wide open and risk the pushback, whatever it may be. One of the books I'm reading right now is Stamped from the Beginning, and I want to
Yes,
run.
yes, yes.
I want to run every time I read it, but I cannot do that because the spirit, the work, my sisters have called me to another place, and that's, I think, the thing we're called to is that other place from wherever we're beginning, because we were born into something and in a time and out of a history, but we've got to be different and open to the spirit, the transformational work. Thank you very much for the ways you're pulling it together, because new voices help me, I hope all of us, to kind of move in that process. Thank you.
You're most welcome. And I'm happy to hear what your congregation is doing, striving toward.
Hello, first of all, I really have appreciated all that you have shared. I'm a daughter of charity, and I know that I came to community long before you did. I'm also from the South.
Okay.
So I'm really interested in, if you could just enlarge your comment about my community wasn't quite ready. I've heard that for many years, and I am familiar with Shannon D. Williams, who's done some work
yes.
on African American women entering white communities, and I've heard some horror stories too. But I'd be interested if you could share what some of your experience was. What's the diversity spread in your province, or is there one? Thank you.
Yes. Let me see how quickly I can do this. Okay. Back in 1982, I was a new novice, and we had a gathering of all the SNDs in the United States. And at that time, I think there were about 8 African-American women altogether from different provinces, me, some sisters from our Chardon, Cleveland province, and sisters from Covington. And also there was a group of Hispanic sisters also. And over the years, people have left for a variety of reasons, God alone knows. But right now there are 2 of us who are African American in the United States who remain. And likewise, in my province, we had a number of Hispanic sisters and only 1 remains. The saddest thing for me is not ever hearing, to the best of my recollection, anyone say, we are not as rich as we could be. What can we do? That saddens me. And I don't always know what to do with that. And actually, I really don't know how much I would encourage an African American woman to join us. I mean, I think I'd certainly talk to her. I'd walk with her if she wanted. But, I just don't know. People have to be open. So, and Sister Shannon interviewed me, and if you want some more details, it's in there. I'm waiting for that book to come out. Yes.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you.
Two points. There's Hadron, our CPU. I'll start with a little story. I know we're not out of time. During no bishop, we met with, I'm a Capuchin, so we met with conventuals, OFMs, whether big, like novice parties, that kind of thing, and well, I think that culture is very beautiful. And then we'll start getting pictures like, oh, let's all Hispanics take a picture together. Together. Asians get together. Middle Eastern, I was the only one by myself. And then I turned to the white drivers, and I was like, hey, take a picture together. Like, no. And I sensed okay, we talk about racism and all that stuff, but sometimes I feel like, especially in the media, it becomes too white shaming. That is then where do we draw the line? I'm like, yes, there's white privilege, there's all these things that happen, there's racism, but at the same time, is
getting too much is becoming white shaming. Not everyone is racist, not everyone's prejudiced, not everyone's biased. What do you comment on that?
If I can be candid, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' most recent letter, that wasn't shaming. But I think from my perspective, it lacked a sense of urgency. It's been, 39, 40 years since the last letter? You know, it didn't capture. But my Archbishop Laurie, has written a letter that is just, it was published soon after the U.S. CCB's letter was published. It's really good. It's really rooted in the Baltimore experience, and there are some quotes from the other letter, but I found that to be really engaging, and I felt some care that I didn't feel when I was reading Open Wide Your Hearts. That doesn't really answer your question. I don't know what to say about that. I don't know what to say. Where I am, I don't think I don't know. I'm not going to speak for anybody. How's that? But thank you for offering that for our reflection. Thank you. And I'm not answering because I really don't know what to say.